I'm feeling drawn towards working with people. I've always felt like I'm someone who can sit in the deep and painful places without flinching. Like, what happens is your capacity slowly over time grows to hold that grief, because that person that you lost the pain of missing them doesn't really go away, and it changes you forever. Death and mortality contemplation really is that key to aliveness and that key to presence and gratitude. It doesn't mean that it's still not fucking terrifying. I do think about my own death and cry. Yes, I do. It's like, and awful, but it is also that flip side of like that beautiful invitation. And it is an invitation to be more powerful, because I think we're more powerful than we think we are.
Put your hand on your heart, look up at the sky, smile and say, hey, I'm alive. Thanks for being alive with me today. Welcome to Be Alive with Kate Manser. Today, I am honored to have Niki DiGaetano, who I have been orbiting. She has been orbiting I. We are in the same death positive, death honoring sphere. And today, Niki is a death doula. She is a writer, a designer, and a backpacker who came to death work following a career and existential crisis in 2019. So by day, she works in design and copywriting. By night, and by the passion of her heart and soul, she helps clients tell stories about their and their loved ones' lives. She also helps the bereaved navigate loss through individual grief support sessions. And in her free time, she's working on a book, can't wait for that explores death's transformative call to live. Sound familiar, and why Niki and I might be connecting, and how that call once saved her life, all set against the story of, I can't wait to talk about this, your 900-mile hike on the AT, the Appalachian Trail. We're going to get into all this and more. Join me in welcoming Niki to the show. Hey, Niki.
Hey, Kate. Thank you for such a sweet introduction with so much heart and passion. Excited to be here.
Oh, well, I mean, come on. You're an adventurer. You are creative. You're into death and life. Like, what is more magical than that? So I'm honored. I have to say, I think we've been in one another's orbit for like 3 or 4 years now. We got to kick off by, we're going to get to the Appalachian Trail. We're going to get to all that amazing stuff. But I just want to know, like, before you came to death work, where were you and who was Niki? Because then that's going to help color this massive change and transformation that you went through.
Who was Niki? Niki doesn't know who Niki was. I was, from reading your book, which I guess we could talk about the whole background of that, I feel like our stories were a little similar in that I did all of the things that were expected of me. And it was fun because it led me to financial stability. So, parents, they say go to college. They say major in something that'll be productive. And so I did that. I blew through high school, put my head down, straight A student through college. I was a dual enrolled student. So that means I was like in college while I was also in high school. So I was just like type A overachiever lady. And it was all because I thought that the goal of my life was to get a job, like a full-time job, that would make me happy forever and just provide for me forever. And that was it. And then I got all those things. I got my full-time first job right out of college in graphic design, which is my major. And that literally happened before I graduated. I just met a guy who had an offer for me. And I'm like, sure, I'll work with you after I graduate. We'll see how it goes. Signed that contract, got an apartment, and I did that for about a year after like the job honeymoon phase was still glowing. And then after a year, so like 2019-ish, I realized, no, this doing what everybody says isn't going to just make you happy, because I'm really freaking miserable. I'm financially comfortable. I'm on a train to just sail off to the sunset and do this graphic design stuff every day until I die. Every day until you die, you're going to wake up, you're going to go to the same office. You're going to make pretty pictures and advertisements for corporations to convince people to buy shit they don't need with money they don't have. And are you happy with that? Are you good with that? The answer was no. I was not good with that. And there was a lot of dichotomy and just a huge amount of cognitive dissonance and miserability. And like, honestly, it felt like going back towards a depressive episode, which I used to wrestle with earlier. So it just felt like I was sliding back into that very dark place of like, oh, wow, nothing matters and everything's worthless. And what have you done? And what are you going to do? And I'm 23. I'm too young to be thinking like this. So it was a hot mess.
Well, and it sounds like you were doing everything early, right? You're like, okay, I was going to college while I was in high school, and then I got the job before I even got out of college. And then you're like in the job and you're just looking down this long line of, oh, okay, like I've arrived and where am
Mm.
I? Right. So, I mean, it sounds like you had to break a tremendous amount of conditioning from society, from your parents. What did that look like when you were breaking down that conditioning? You talked a little bit about cognitive dissonance, and what was it that got you through that to be able to change your life?
Yeah, so the conditioning, I think to answer that question, you have to unpack the conditioning itself, which was do all these things and then you'll be happy. That was, I think, the paradigm that I was operating from was do all of this and then you'll be happy, like that if then statement. And that was just kind of how I think I was unconsciously raised. My parents did their best. Like they were trying to set me up to be a successful, financially stable human. So I don't fault that, but I think that's the messaging that I ultimately walked away with. And so it wasn't just do this and you'll be happy. So I had to kind of unpack, well, what is happy? And I know that's like a theme that comes up on your show and in your book from what I remember. And just with a lot of people that I've spoken with as well, it's like, well, what is happy? And I didn't know. So I had to okay, I don't know if you remember this, but there was a weird time. I don't know if it still does this, but Google Chrome or Safari or one of those browsers. I don't know what I had, but like it would just pop up random suggestions. Like, here's some articles you might be interested in. So while I was, yeah, okay. So you know what I mean? So like during lunch break, I would like read all these random articles about like self-help and philosophy and happiness and just like random pop culture articles that weren't rooted necessarily in deep philosophy, but they were helpful and informative. And around that time, I discovered you and your work. And I'm like, oh, it doesn't have to necessarily be this way. And I felt this like tugging of like this pull towards something that involves people, like people focused and not so much corporate focused, not so much just doing this kind of soulless work. And in full transparency, I am still doing that job today, but I have figured out how to align that work with other work as well. So like I figured out like I didn't have to necessarily quit my job and move to Bali or something, but we're still in that transition, but it's a lot better than it was years ago. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, so I started researching all these like random articles and I ended up telling a friend of mine from college who was also of the similar mindset of like personal growth and kind of deep thinker and always like a restless spirit. And I said to him, like, here's where I'm at. This sucks. How's your design career going, buddy? And I shared with him my thoughts. And he said, you know, I don't know if this is going to help at all, but my dad, he is a recruiter for hospice. He works for Bayada Hospice. And maybe you could share some of these struggles with him and maybe he can help you out. And I'm like, kind of weird, but okay. So I met with his father for lunch at a diner. And at the end of it, I basically was like, yeah, you know what? I think I'll try being a volunteer. Why not? It's volunteer work. It's like a low commitment thing. I'm feeling drawn towards working with people. I've always felt like I'm someone who can sit in the deep and painful places without flinching. Like people come to me for advice and they tell me, like, I don't want to use the word trauma dump because I hate that word, but I get that a lot from just friends and family. So I've always been able to just kind of hold it. And so I thought, oh, maybe hospice wouldn't be so bad. And then that was also happening right around the same time where some of those Google articles were getting smarter and figuring out what I wanted to read. And so they were starting to trend more towards like end of life and just here's how death helps you feel like alive. And just, it wasn't as much of a conversation back then as it is now. This whole death and dying piece and aliveness piece. I'm so happy it's kind of coming towards the forefront. But I was starting to read more of those pieces. And so the hospice volunteering, connecting with that just felt like, let's try it out and see where it goes.
Wow, amazing. So you were just following the path, right, of your interest. You were slowly opening your mind, it sounds like, and just trusting, like, I don't know where this is going, but I'm just going to give it a chance.
Hmm.
Right. And I think a lot of times when we're in a period of deconditioning in our lives, but you were like, I'm just going to follow this little path. I'm not like quitting my shit and blowing up my whole life, but I am going to follow this and see where it goes. So how did that transition into you becoming a death doula? So you started volunteering, and what happened from there?
Yeah. So with the volunteering, I learned that I really liked it. I enjoyed sitting in this space with people. A lot of the hospice patients that I sat with weren't all at the cusp of life and death. A lot of them were still rather chatty and talkative, and they were so excited to have someone to just share stories with and shoot the shit with, really. I really loved hanging out with them and listening to them go on, and they liked hanging out with me, so it was mutually beneficial. So I discovered that I loved it. And then also around that time, the Google search articles were spitting out things like, hey, like, well, actually, no, I take that back. It wasn't just Google. I was taking the initiative and I was researching like hospice jobs or things to do with hospice because now I'm like, holy crap, I want this to be my work. In the search for that, I discovered in Australia, they were doing this thing called palliative care biographers, which is where their volunteers would sit with hospice patients and they would document their life stories and write it down. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. From that moment on, that's what officially just lit my fire of like, I have to be a part of this somehow. Through searching adjacent to that kind of area, I saw something about end of life doulas. The University of Vermont back in 2019 was one of the few programs offering end of life doula training, whereas now there's like 10 trillion of them. But it was one of the few programs that was up and running. So I said, I don't know what this is. I don't necessarily know what end of life doula is, but this training seems cool. I'm going to go find out. So I signed up for it and was trained as a doula.
Amazing. So what did that program look like? Was it online? How long was it? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it was online. I believe it was like 6 months-ish. So what would happen is, just like a lot of online courses, the woman who was heading it, Francesca Arnoldi, a forefront in the doula world, she would record like lectures and such, and we'd listen to them, and then we'd have like a forum to interact with people. I don't think we ever had any live classes, which kind of sucked. It wasn't the best, but it was enough to get me really started. Now I have an education. I kind of know what this is. I love this. So,
And then you discovered this other side passion of not only you're discovering that you enjoy sitting next to the people who are dying and hearing their stories and talking with them and engaging with them, but you also found this thing in Australia that's like, oh my gosh, I can actually tell their stories. So what did that look like? How did that come to be? What does it look like to take? Are you writing down their stories? What does that work look like? Because just so that people are understanding who are listening, you're not just a death doula, you're also blending this element of storytelling with your death doula work.
yeah. So let me answer that first question first. So I actually didn't start that process of writing down client stories until like years later. But what happened is I was trying to bring that piece, that storytelling into the work, but it wasn't really working because it's being a doula is very entrepreneurial. There's not really a job. Like you don't well, go to a hospice agency and they have like job postings for doulas. So basically you have to be very creative and you have to kind of figure out how you're going to incorporate your offerings. You have to figure out how to market yourself and how you're going to sell yourself. And back then I didn't really know how to do all that. So I was trained in 2019, but I didn't really start practicing for real clients until 2023. Years later. There was a big gap. Like I had the title, I sat on the knowledge, but I didn't really do anything with it. I think what I was doing was I was educating myself more and learning and like connecting with people, making connections in the doula space, the end of life space, folks like yourself. But to fast forward to answer your other question of like, what does this work look like for me today? It's very dependent on the client. So sometimes I had one client who was experiencing dementia. So that person couldn't really talk that much, or at least they could talk, but it was in like short bursts. And then that person declined kind of rapidly. So it ended up being like, instead of me interviewing the client, I was interviewing the family members. So I was interviewing the children, the siblings, and the wife, things like that. And I would record those interviews and then I would type them up and I would ask them questions to kind of get them started like on a topic. So, hey, tell me about your loved ones. Like, how did he meet his wife? Like, what were they like in childhood? Things like that. And it ended up actually becoming more of like a photo book, like not even a novel or things that was just like only written down, but it was a photo book. So there was like photos, and I like to think of it as like a coffee table book. You know how they're like an aesthetic vibe kind of thing with like little blurbs about stories. That's kind of the style I was going for. So I was able to marry my graphic design background with the writing, with the stories, with all of it. And it was just this holistic thing. That was one client. Sometimes it's just easier for the loved ones. This one guy actually had written up a ton of his stories just by hand with the most beautiful cursive. And his granddaughter was giving me those stories, and it made my job very easy because all I had to do was like type it up and make sure that things kind of flowed, because he'd write them in little episodes and I would just either embellish it a little bit to make more detail come out of the story. But this person had a really sharp memory. So I'm totally rambling, but yeah, safe to say is it depends on the client. It depends on the situation, depends on the family. I can work remote. I tend to do a lot of my work just from this little office space and this magical computer screen. I'm also working with a client who's telling the story of someone who died. So we're like writing a posthumous book. But yeah, just there's a lot of variety. No people are the same. No stories are the same. And I've learned very quickly that no two books and projects are the same.
That is incredible. I honestly got tears in my eyes when you were saying that you were incorporating your graphic design background because, ah, how often do we feel like we're just on the totally wrong path and that everything we've done up to this point is like so far from what we actually want to do? But I want to say like 100% of the time, but I'm going to say 99. 99% of the time when I hear stories like this, we can see how where we eventually end up, we can see how every job, whether it's a person that we met or a skill that we learned, that we were meant to do that, right? Like that there was something that we were in that path for. And so to hear that you were like, you were really on that brink of a deep depression. You're like, I'm in this graphic design. It's like, this is not for me. I don't actually want to do this. This is my parents' shit, not my shit. And then you make this transition, towing this, and eventually come into just blending this incredible skill set together and then still having the graphic design background, which is still your day job, to give you the financial safety to put your whole heart and soul into this death doula work. I'm just so in love with your story and the courage that you had to keep pressing through the dark, right? Because I'm sure it was very scary at different points. And you're like, yeah, I didn't sign up for a job. I'm just sort of making it up as I go. And people are probably like, this girl's crazy. So now you're an entrepreneur and you have a day job, which is just incredible. Like marrying the passion with the security. And tell me about your personal transformation, because it sounds like, we've covered the ground of the logistics of what you've done and all of that, but how have you changed in this work?
Mm, I'm a lot more grateful and I'm a lot more happy. And I feel like your podcast name is a very apt representation of that. Just, be alive, because I can say that I am now. When for pretty much all of my life, I wasn't. I was just kind of going through the motions and I was speeding along and I was checking all the boxes. Again, type A. I love my to-do lists. I have to-do lists. I haven't abandoned them. But like, you can't live your life by to-do lists because then you check them off and like, you can't just live for those things. Like, where's the joy in the middle? Where's the aliveness in the middle of those boxes? And so I think I figured out, or I think I've kind of softened into learning about how to do that. And for me, that's a big deal. Also, the fact that I was deeply suicidally depressed at one point is a rather steep pivot. Most people experience the darkness in teenage years, and I was no exception. Just not great things at home and just the typical angst. And so I went through it time. And it got worse in college, where I think my soul deep down knew that, like, why are you just like running? I don't know. Just everything felt really bleak and hopeless and dark and like just empty. I was still going through the motions. I'd still show up to class. It was fine. I had friends. It was cool, but it just didn't feel good. And so I just kind of stumbled through college. My family was not doing great. And I was in counseling at the time. But I was also like, yeah, dying would be nice. Like, I was not opposed to that. I didn't necessarily have a plan, but I was doing that. And then I also was wrestling with self-harm. Like, I have a lot of self-injury issues. Like, not now anymore, but that was something that I'd used to cope with everything and all the angst, and it kept the suicidal ideation at bay. My tattoos are covering up a lot of my scars, but, made art out of not great things. So there was all that. There was a lot of heaviness, and that kind of starting to resurface when the career crisis kicked in, I guess, 2019. It was like, oh, hey, you did all these things, and you're done riding that high of graduating and all that good stuff that pushed the darkness away. It's kind of coming back. What are you going to do about that? So that's when kind of discovering this death care stuff and diving into it and just kind of really rethinking how I looked at life really shifted a lot of things for me. And then also the Appalachian Trail hike did a lot of, I like to say that death work kind of introduced me to this new way of thinking. But then when I went on that hike, it kind of really solidified and made real for me that way of thinking, if that makes sense.
Tell me everything about what year was it? You said you went to death doula school in 2019, then you didn't really start practicing until 2023. So when was the AT hike?
The AT hike I left on May 14th, 2022.
So how did you come to decide to do so is this the full AT you did?
No, so the full AT is like 2,200 miles. I did about
only 900 miles. How many days was it?
3 months and 3 days exactly.
What do we need to know about your experience on the AT?
It was amazing, first of all. The best summer of my life, even though it was hard. It was very hard. my partner at the time, we had been kind of going through rough patches, on and off patches. We were in kind of a good patch where I was very surprised when one day he sat me down and said, "Hey, we're going to take a break." We've been dating for about 4 years at that point. They were not good years. His parents were a little racist, which is funny because I'm a Chinese American woman with no trace of an accent. So it's just, they were very traditional. And that was a sore point in our relationship. And I was not also acting as my best self handling that issue for years. So I think he just hit his breaking point and he's like, you know what? We have to have a break. So I let him keep the apartment because he had a job that was physical, whereas I was remote, so I can kind of go wherever I had to. I was still working for that same guy who hired me out of college. So I kind of like drifted around between my brother's place, my friend's place. I was kind of homeless. I didn't really want to crash on my parents' couch because I didn't really want to deal with, like, it was just a lot. So during that uncertainty, because he didn't tell me when he wanted to get back together, I said, you know what? This is a good time to go hike. You know, you've wanted to do the Appalachian Trail. I was part of it. You wanted to do it for years. I've always been a hiker and an outdoors person, but I never thought I was going to be able to, especially once I got with my partner and he settled down and he had a job in Maryland. We were in Baltimore. And I just figured that was going to be a someday, maybe never thing, but someday maybe is now here. So you should go do it. So I told my boss, who happened to have just hired somebody else. So I'm like, this new guy can take over my stuff and I can leave and hopefully you won't fire me. And my boss was cool with it. He was very generous. And he's like, you can leave unpaid time. Just come back when you're done. I said, give me 3 months. I can't do the whole thing in 3 months, but I figured it would be too hard to ask him for like 6 months to do the entire trail. I figured 3 months was a good compromise. I figured from there I could do the northern half of the trail. So I started in West Virginia and I went up about 15 miles into Maine before I stopped at that point. But there was the White Mountains in New Hampshire. I don't know if you know that area of the Northeast, but it was supposed to be like one of the most beautiful areas on the entire Appalachian Trail. So I really wanted to experience that. And I'm so glad I did. It was my favorite part. I started up by myself. My parents were unhappy about that part. My mom was like, who the hell, why are you going by yourself? You're a young woman, bring a gun. And I'm like, no, I don't have a gun. I don't want a gun. And I don't have anybody to go with me. So sorry, I'm going. See ya. And I was only alone for about 2 weeks. And then I started meeting people because the Appalachian Trail is a very social experience. There's people that you hike with and there's shelters spaced out maybe like every 10 miles. And people always tend to stop in the shelters because there's like tent sites there. There's usually water there. There's a privy, so you can go to the bathroom, which is nice, instead of having to dig holes. People tend to stop at shelters, and so you start seeing the same people over and over again. And so eventually I did that enough times and started connecting with them. We had a group of about like 7 to 8 people at our biggest, which is a pretty big group. They call it a trail family.
Oh.
And we hiked a lot through Pennsylvania. We did most of Pennsylvania together. We started splitting up a little bit because people would hike faster than others. People would get injured. People would decide like, I want to go slower. Eventually it was like me and 3 other people, then me and 2 other people, and then me and this one guy who I met in New Jersey, who I'm now engaged to. So that is a whole other thing. I don't know like what specifics you want to know about the trail, but it was a lot of fun. It was hard. Vermont was hard because I think I was about 600 miles deep at that point. And I was getting tired of being like stinky and hungry and sweaty. And I missed my ex. He was my partner at the time. I missed him. He just felt like a siren song to go home to him because he had said to me before I left, he's like, hey, actually, I want to fix it now. I want to repair the relationship. And I'm like, dude, we've been on a break for a month and I planned this whole trip. I'm not going to just quit this trip because you want to get back together. So we'll deal with it when I get back, which I said that with a brave face, but I was like shaking. Like I was like, oh my God, what if I say no and he doesn't come back? Because I was so fucking trauma bonded to this dude. A whole other problem. So in Vermont, I was ready to go home and get off this fucking trail and stop being gross and have actual food and get back with my boyfriend. We were also going really fast. Me and these 2 other people, the girl that I met in Pennsylvania and the guy that's not my fiance. We were going like 16 to 20 miles a day. Vermont is actually really hard as a state. Pennsylvania's kind of flat. Maryland's kind of flat. You got like fields. The trails are soft. You get a couple hard things here and there, but Vermont gets really rugged. Like the trails just go straight up a mountain, tons of rocks. And we were still trying to push the same mileage we were doing on the easy stuff. I don't want to quit yet. I don't want to quit like this and feel so angry and like bitter about the trail. I want to enjoy the experience. But if we don't stop, I'm going to just bail. So we slowed down. And we agreed at that point that we weren't going to go to Katahdin. That's the northern terminus of the trail. It's like in the middle of Maine. It's like 200 miles into Maine. So we just figured we'll stop somewhere in Maine, but we won't go all the way up. When I decided to let go of that goal, because if you notice a theme here, I have this problem with chasing after goals. I
I
let
don't
go of
know
that.
what you're talking about. I have never felt that in my life. Me?
Relatable.
No. Yes, I
Oh,
1000% understand, and I loved your
yeah.
self-awareness. Okay, so you're, like, hiking, and at this point, you've been on the trail for how long when you decided to let go of the terminus goal?
2 months.
Your group agreed? You guys were all like, "Okay, we're all letting go of the terminus," or at least we're all agreeing to slow down?
Me and that one girl agreed to slow down. And then me and my fiance, who wasn't my fiance, we weren't even into each other. He was going to push ahead. And so I felt really sad because we were like really close at that point. We didn't love each other. We weren't like goo goo gaga, but we liked each other like friends, me and him and the other girl. Yeah, we've been traveling together for like 500 miles. And so he's like, I want to go to Katahdin. So I'll see you guys later. But he couldn't bring himself to leave. And then what ended up happening is the girl, so like our mutual friend, she ended up quitting because she had some struggles off trail. So she quit in New Hampshire just before the whites. And when that happened, my fiance was like, yeah, I do want to go to Katahdin, but I feel kind of a jerk to leave Niki behind. And you know what? Maybe we'll just do this together. We'll just finish this together. And he was starting to wrestle with some stuff off trail as well that he wanted to go home to. So we just agreed, him and I, to continue until like the main border. And then we would stop at the same time. So yeah, it was just at that point, just three of us. So then the girl quit. And then it was just the two of us. And we traveled together through New Hampshire and part of Maine.
And then parted ways.
He was getting ready to move to Utah, and I was going to go home to my boyfriend back in Baltimore. And we were like, oh, that kind of sucks because we noticed some budding feelings a little bit. But we were like, we're not going to, I want to go home and work on my partner and things like that. So we parted ways. He got ready to move to Utah, and I came home and tried to fix my relationship. But my partner was acting really weird, just like oddly controlling. And I thought to myself, maybe this is just a me thing because I've been in the woods for 3 months and I'm used to no one telling me what to do. I'm used to taking a piss whenever I want. I'm used to not having to provide any accountability to anyone, let alone a boyfriend who has expectations. So I was like chafing at his controllingness, but it was so weird. And later I found out it was because he was actually dating someone, and he had been dating someone the entirety of the time that I was gone. The reason he kicked me out of the house is because he was trying to date someone that he met on Bumble. And I found all this out when his girlfriend called me. So thankfully that happened after, I don't know what's wrong. I tried, but this isn't working. I don't know what's going on. Maybe it's me, maybe it's you, but I just don't want this anymore. And I broke up with him. And he got really creepy and really not great. And I was a little dismayed at that because I was willing to leave bygones be bygones, but he got really aggressive. So it wasn't a fun time. So I ended up at that point, I had actually decided, no, dump this guy. I kind of want to do this thing that I've been thinking about for years, which was move out to Colorado. Because as a teenager, I kind of fantasized about living out west. And when I was in Baltimore, still kind of trying to follow the rules and do what everybody told me to do, I would look at Instagram and see my childhood friends moving out west and being bitterly jealous that they were doing that, which told me like, hey, I think you still want this. So I'm like, you know what? Dump the guy. I still have my job, which is remote. So I'm going to move. And my fiance had mentioned Utah. And I'm like, why Utah? Why not Colorado? And he said, well, because it's cheaper out there than Denver. And the mountains are way closer because in Denver, the mountains are like an hour drive away, which I didn't know that. So Utah's on my radar. So I decided to do like, what will Utah be like? Let's try that. Then I was still in touch with this guy. We kind of got back in touch and we're like, do you want to give a relationship a try? So we got together in December of 2022 and I decided to move to Utah in March of 2023. So I can't remember if there was a question that you asked me anywhere in there because I'm definitely just rambling.
No, this is great. I'm like
Yeah.
locked into your story. It's really beautiful. So yeah, so you get off the trail and the whole thing breaks up with the guy. It was not pretty. It sounds like you went through a lot of just challenge. It was not a graceful landing,
No.
we'd say, after the AT. There was more metaphorical mountains to be climbed. And then you're like, okay, I'm going to do this thing that I've always wanted to do. You reconnect with the guy. And it really sounds like your life kind of re-began then. I mean, a lot of new beginnings, right? A lot of things are crashing and ending. And then you move out to Utah. That's a new beginning. You start the relationship with this guy. And then it sounds like shortly after your death doula work began.
Yeah. So I will touch on the death doula work, but I want to bring it back really quick to the trail because I think a lot of the beginnings and the newness kind of happened in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. It was the spot where I felt actually truly deeply alive in the way that like the books about death work kind of talked about, but I got to really embody it and just soak it up into every cell. And like I would walk through those mountains kind of crying a little bit because it was just so beautiful. It was also really hard. The White Mountains are like the hardest part of the whole trail. Everybody complains about it. And it was brutally hard, but it was so pretty. It was like stunningly gorgeous. And I just remember thinking like, this is such a contrast of like what you felt like before. This should be your new benchmark almost. And so I realized it wasn't really authentic and it wasn't really aliveness. It was just kind of complacency was the word. It was complacent. And so that was kind of the framework that I was in when I got back to real life and figured out things weren't working out with the partner. And I'm like, yeah, I'm changed and I can't really accept this anymore. So we're done. My self-worth was always kind of in the toilet because I was always wrestling with this feeling of just not belonging with him and his family, who never invited me to Christmas or a party like ever in the 5 years that we were dating because they didn't like my eyes, I guess. And so it was just hard to kind of get in the headspace to do death work and to put yourself out there because this is kind of heavy work. And I was just so preoccupied with my own drama storm that I couldn't really focus. And so that's why, looking back, I think there was such a big gap of training in 2019 to be a death doula, but not doing jack shit with it until I got off the Appalachian Trail, blew up my life, started over, ditched the boyfriend and got with this other guy and moved. Now I'm in Utah. And so I did the thing. I've been here since 23. Once I planted myself here, I thought to myself, what's next? Doing that whole like goal checking thing. What's next? But it felt better. It was like, I want to do the doula work. I've been talking about it and learning, but I haven't done shit. Like, you're just a fake. Like, what are you actually doing? So I ended up connecting with a bunch, like some of those Instagram connections I had made were doulas or people that were practicing actively. And I just started posting random, like, hey, I'm looking for opportunities. Sometimes I'll just like cold message people, pick their brains, get on calls, things like that. And someone finally said, hey, there might be a space for you at the national, what's it called? We just had a merger, so the name is different. It's now called the Alliance for Care at Home, but it used to be called the National Hospice and Palliative Care Organization, NHPCO. And they have a grief program where they just let people submit a form for free. They'll do grief support for 4 sessions. It started because of COVID, where there was so much grief that people needed a space to process it. And so these doulas got together, made a cohort of doulas who offer this program. And so I emailed them and said, can I join? I've been trained. I'm not really practicing, but I would love to join you, get some experience. And they were very open with me and they let me kind of start that way. And I still volunteer with that program today, in addition to my paid grief support. Because the only difference being is that program, you kind of have to stop after 4 to 6 sessions. But with like my support that you pay for, we can do it as long as you want or as long as you need, whatever methods I would like to incorporate without being like following program guidelines kind of thing. But they're both beautiful in their own ways, right? Like they offer different people what they need in different ways, different times. So that's kind of how I really got into the grief work, which is not something I envisioned myself getting into. Grief was not really like something I was thinking of specializing in, but now that I'm doing it, I really love it.
Amazing. So we're going to get into the grief work because I think, in just the short time that you've been doing that work, you've already gathered so much wisdom that you've brought. This is the Be Alive podcast. So I would be honored if you would just try to take words, which a lot of these experiences are ineffable. They're very difficult to put words to. But if you could just try to take us through that experience of a new height of aliveness in the White Mountains. Because you said it so beautifully. You said, what I experienced in the White Mountains, it sounds like it essentially raised your bar of what feeling alive is. You thought you had felt alive up to that point, but then after the White Mountains, you're like, oh, whoa, I can be on this whole other level. So if you could just use whatever comes up and take us through what it was like for you walking through those White Mountains, crying. What did you see? What did you feel? All of it.
Every day that I was in there, the White Mountains took me about 2 weeks to go through. But every day that I was there, I remember thinking to myself and writing in my trail journal that walking through here is like living in a painting because it's just so pretty. And I didn't see that kind of beauty in Baltimore. It was just the fucking cement jungle. So, jagged peaks. I grew up in Pennsylvania, so I got to see some woodlands, but never like that. It was just a whole other level. Beautiful. I think a big part for me as well was in the whites, I was living differently. I was forced to finally get out of that fucking like goal checklist mindset. And it happens to a lot of hikers too, because they start doing this. It's called mile crushing, where they're like, oh, we're going to do 20 miles today, boys. We're going to do 25. We're going to do a half marathon. Like everybody wants to try to you got to break up the boredom of walking somehow. So they start doing that. And I started doing that. And in the White Mountains, you kind of can't do that because they're just so It's so much climbing. The terrain is so rugged. There's like, you're walking up something like a giant slab that used to be a waterfall. Like, that's how bad it is. And I went down from like 18 miles a day to 10. And I did it on purpose because, one, it was good to just experience the beauty of it and not try to destroy my knees or my body. I'm also carrying like a 25-pound pack. So, everything is harder with that. And just going through there really forced me to understand and really embody this idea of letting go of control. I'm a control freak. So letting go of control, I had to let go of that goal of the Katahdin. So the end of the trail, I had to like cut the hike 200 miles short. Instead, I got to just be. I got to just be in those mountains and be in that painting every day and experience hiking with this guy that I was maybe just kind of sort of starting to catch feelings for. And just like, and he also is someone who loves nature. So like, it was a different experience for me to share the beauty of mountains with someone who is also there crying with me. Like, the sunset is so pretty. Like the golden rays of you could see, you could look on top of a ridge and see where you'd be hiking the next day. And you could point across the valley and say, oh, that's where we're going to be tomorrow. We'll be on that ridge. And that's just a really cool experience for someone who's used to hiking in the green tunnel where it's kind of claustrophobic. I don't love it. And so it was just so beautiful to share that with someone else and to see like that joy and aliveness mirrored in his face as well. And to not just feel like I have to do. And the whole time in the whites, suddenly I was like, oh, I don't want my hike to end. In Vermont, all I wanted was to be done. I wanted to go home. I wanted to go back with my partner. I wanted to have food again, like yummy food. I wanted to shower. And then in the whites, I was just like, no, stop, pause. Every day was suddenly precious. Every day was suddenly beautiful. Every day was like, oh, I get to like have filtered water from a mountain spring. Hooray. Everything was suddenly beautiful in a way that I had been so busy rushing through that I couldn't see before. So that was, I think, the best way I could describe that.
Amazing. Yeah. Wow. So just the power of letting go of control,
Mm.
letting go of the goal allowed you to experience that on a whole other level. And then, like you said, it sounds like afterward you had this different bar of what aliveness is. And then, you blew up your life and changed everything. You got into this program with grief. And I think it's beautiful that we're going from talking about aliveness to grief because, different times when I have felt grief, when I have even felt heartbreak after, the ending of a relationship, there is an aliveness to it. There really, it's all your emotions are laid bare. You're in deep despair and pain. And there's just this, the dark night of the soul is a mystical experience, just like you might experience when you take a psychedelic drug or walk through the White Mountains. So how has this grief work transformed your life, and what have you learned from your patients? So or your clients, just start to talk us through what's this experience for you.
A lot of the people that I've worked with verbatim said to me, hold your loved ones close because you never know when it's going to end. And I knew that from my study and training as a doula and reading books for 3 years in between that space when I wasn't practicing. So I knew it. But to hear them tell it to me kind of hit deeper. And also they were actively grieving the death of someone they love. So I'm like, wow, this is coming straight from the horse's mouth. It just hits you a little harder. Do I hug my fiance a little bit closer from all that? Yeah, I do. Is the temptation to speak sharply a little bit lesser because I sometimes ask myself, what if he doesn't come home? What he works construction. So it's like, what if some accident happens? Would you want these to be the last words that he ever heard from you? And no, I wouldn't. So it's helped kind of sharpen that appreciation for the people that I love, my parents too. Sometimes I have gone through oscillating periods of struggle with one of them, and practicing and living in this space of grief and death and just kind of immersing myself in it has made it so that I don't feel the temptation to estrange myself or to cut off contact or to just really be distant. And instead, I try to draw closer. Even when they kind of piss me off, I do my best to be a little bit more patient. And I know they do that with me too. So it's not like I'm a saint, but I think it's easier, especially in our culture now, to just kind of cut and run. And I have felt that temptation, but it's lessened since doing this work. I feel like, wow, my parents are old. They're 69. They had us late. And it's like, not that I want to be paranoid about them dying every day, but, that thought pops up. It's like, wow, it's very precious. And I said to myself a little while ago, after visiting them, I thought to myself, wow, I understand now why my grandfather would cry every single time that my mom and I said goodbye to him, because we would visit him in Georgia, but we lived in Pennsylvania. And I remember thinking, he's a silly old man for crying. He's, we're fine, but he would cry every time. And now I'm like on the verge of tears whenever I say bye to my parents. Like the last couple of visits I've seen them, I'm like, oh my God, don't cry in front of my, I mean, maybe I should just let myself cry, but like part of what's like, wow, I understand why he cried because it's never enough time. And, this has kind of sharpened that. Sometimes I feel like this work can accentuate anxiety if you're not careful, if you don't kind of regularly check in, because I've noticed that too. Sometimes when my partner doesn't text me back, I'm like, oh, he's not like sometimes some girls would be like, oh, he's cheating on me or whatever. And I'm like, oh, is he fucking dead? Like, did he die?
Yeah.
My brain literally will go, well, like a traffic accident. What if a drunk driver hit him? You don't know. Like, you could die. The likelihood of dying on the way to a grocery store is so much higher than dying on the Appalachian Trail. Anyway, so sometimes thinking about that can be a little bit sharp and heavy and like, oh, I'm feeling very anxious today. And probably it's because I've had this many sessions back to back, or I'm holding this much grief back to back. Trying to hone into my own practice of caring for myself after sessions or just in general. It's helping with my self-awareness, like checking in and being able to say, oh, I have a little bit of anxiety right now, instead of just being like, why am I messed up? It's like, oh, because I had this session and maybe I'm just carrying a lot and I need to just de-stress. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, I would say just like gratitude, enhanced appreciation, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, and I think one thing that we talked about before was this idea of there's a notion in society that after 2.5 months, people should be over it. But what it sounds like you're saying is that it's this ongoing dance. So what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've had clients tell me that people in their lives have told them that, and I get so like frustrated on their behalf. It's like, wow, we still think this way. Grief is not something that we just get over. It's not something you get over in 2.5 months or a year or 2 years. It still is in there. A metaphor I often give clients is it's like a ball about the size of a golf ball inside of a small glass cup. And then next to it is that same ball, the same size, inside of a bigger glass cup, and the same ball inside of a bigger glass cup. And so basically what it's saying is everybody thinks that grief gets smaller over time, but that's not what happens. What happens is your capacity slowly over time grows to hold that grief, because that person that you lost doesn't, the pain of missing them doesn't really go away, and it changes you forever. So yeah, that's usually what I say to clients who have experienced someone who's telling them that, oh, you should be over it by now. And then those clients are really distressed because they're like, am I crazy? Am I depressed? Like I've had clients come to me who think, am I clinically depressed? And I'm like, you don't seem like it. I'm not a grief therapist, although I'm training to be one. From my training and from what I've been taught to watch out for, you're not depressed. You are in mourning. You are in grief, and this is totally normal. Let's normalize and validate that. And they're just like, thank you to hear that. It's just so sad to me that this is still a conversation we have in society. But anyway.
So you do still see a lot of shame associated with
Yeah.
grief?
Shame and like, yeah, I guess that's a good word for it. Yeah. Shame and get over itness and like, why aren't you better yet? And then they feel shame about that. And I call that like unnecessary suffering, because there's always suffering in life. Like grief is suffering, grief is pain. But then there's like suffering on top of that that doesn't need to be there. And that's when like your people in your life add on top of your grief by saying unhelpful things of like, well, why aren't you over this? Or the well-meaning things people try to say. And I call that's like unnecessary suffering that we can alleviate a little bit when we talk to someone who actually knows grief and can validate your experience and kind of remove that shame a little bit.
How does grief show up in your life now? What have you learned as you work through it in your own life?
That's a good question, because I actually had a client that I worked with who was a death doula, and she expressed some kind of like trepidation of talking to another doula, as if like because she's a doula, she should have all the answers already. I'm like, no, doulas talk to doulas for support. Therapists have therapists. And I say my fiance's family is experiencing some impending loss, one which might involve death, one which is like medical crises. It's not great. And without disclosing, I guess, all the details, I just know that it's going to be a pretty heavy storm coming probably. And I have a meeting scheduled with my mentor soon to talk about it, because I don't know what the fuck to do. And that's something that I can say freely, because it's like, it's easier almost to help a stranger with their grief than to help the person who's closest to you. And also the grief that I'm going to experience secondhand from watching him go through it and watching his family go through it. And I know all the things. I know all the theories. I know, like, I guess what not to say and do. But at the same time, it's also like, I'm still human at the end of the day. You can know all the things and you still need help. You still need support. I'm so excited to talk to my mentor tomorrow and just have her give me space. And like, it's not, and she's not like my therapist. This is actually, so it's not going to be clinical space. It'll be just a death doula to a death doula, a person who knows grief. And she can help me put words to the things that I'm feeling, the things that are like running around my head, and like, how can I best support my loved ones? And I can tell a stranger how to do it. I can tell a client how to do it. But when it comes to yourself, it's difficult. It's like with graphic design. You're not supposed to do your own branding and your own design for your own company because you're too close. You can't really see it. But I can design things all day long for my design clients because I can zoom out in a way that they can't. I think that metaphor has just hit me. I think it's very appropriate to my situation right now. I know all the things, but I can't zoom out enough to deal with it properly because I am in it. These are my people. These aren't just someone else's people. So,
Well, and again, I think it brings this awareness to the power of saying, I don't got this, which is, I think, similar to what you experienced on the AT when you were like, I'm pushing towards this goal. I'm going to get it. Like, this is what we're going for. I don't need to act like I'm totally okay, that I have everything under control. So I'm going to, in this case, with what's going on in your family, say, I'm going to reach out to my mentor. I'm going to talk to other people to help guide me through this journey. If those of you who are listening who are like Niki and I and have overachievers illness, who are, we're always trying to get to the next thing and we want to achieve this and that, there's just a tightness that's involved in that. There's this sort of constriction and almost like a tunnel vision, a narrow-mindedness, right? And I pride myself on being an open-minded person, but I very much have the tendency to get tunnel focused on something to where I'm not seeing where I need to invite in help. And it sounds like that's a theme in your life as well. So, when you say you don't got it, what do you feel?
a different mentor of mine actually recently introduced me to the phrase, embrace the wandering, because wandering is part of the journey. And that's a phrase that's very, very counterintuitive to my personal nature. It has gotten better over literally the last 6 months. I've gotten better at it. And I guess I've come closer to accepting that at different times in my life than others. But even the first half of this year was a period of dark questioning of what am I doing? I don't really know. Everything's kind of eh. And that's when I heard, that's when she told me embrace the wandering because that's part of the journey of grief. That's part of the journey of life. And so I'm trying to really breathe that one in. And I think I'm getting a little bit better at it. I feel like saying embrace the wandering is my way of saying, yeah, I don't got it. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I have a general, you mentioned it earlier, a feeling out in the dark of what I want to do. And right now that what I want to do is I want to apply to a master's program in mental health counseling, which may or may not replace my day job. That's the wandering. So I don't know what to do about that necessarily, except the next best step is to do the research on the programs I want to apply to. The step after that's going to be applying. With my personal life and the grief that I'm walking through, the next best step, the next wandering is wait and see what happens. You can't really do anything until then. Wait and see, seek out the support that I have. I know I have, and I would encourage, listeners, get support. I know I have people that are either in the space of death and grief or they're therapists or they're just friends who listen and I can share with them and know that I have a space to process over there. And I don't have to dump my crap over my partner who will be walking through his own share of crap. So figuring out how to compartmentalize all that before things hit the fan is kind of the next best step in how I'm going to wander through this period of I don't know. I really know. I guess I thought I knew when I was 19 in college, so sure about my career, but that was a facade. So I don't know. Do we ever know?
Well, and I think it really ties into the experience of grief as well. This notion of embracing the wandering, releasing control over what grief is and should look like, whether it's anticipatory grief or grief after a death, but just knowing that we will end up somewhere and that there's discoveries to be made all along the way. And that, just like you, I've definitely found when I'm so narrow-mindedly focused on this thing that I feel like I have to get, I'm missing a lot. Imagine if you had been walking through the White Mountains so focused on getting to that place in Maine and you would have missed one of the peak experiences of your life, it sounds like. And yeah, just to the phrase that, is popular in Buddhism is, to wear our beliefs like a light jacket. And I think it's also to wear our goals and our objectives like a light garment as well, right? Like to
Mm,
not have this like, oh, I got to tie my tie and, put on my power suit and go for it. It's like, okay, yes, I have a goal and I want to get there and I'm getting there, but I'm open to what might come along that journey. And very often things come in unexpected packages for sure.
yeah, that's a very apt description of how this year has been going for me, and I guess the greater trajectory of my life of the last few years, but it's been condensed. And I'm not, again, someone who's used to doing that, someone who wears my goals like a white jacket. It's like,
Yeah.
but now I'm like, yeah, I'll go apply to the CMHC program. Yeah, I'll get to that tomorrow if I can't do it today. It's like just releasing a lot of that, I don't know, neuroticism or whatever, like you said, the get things done disease. That's kind of where just kind of like recovering from that, um, it's helped a lot for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's a life, at least for me, I can say it's a lifelong journey that I'm not expecting to be cured of because there are elements of me being a hard driving leader with goals that I love. But then there are definitely the shadow side where it's like, okay, I need to release and be willing to receive whatever comes along my path. So I'm curious now to talk about the tie in between the AT and that huge experience that was obviously so life-changing. Of course, you if you're not watching this on YouTube and you're listening when Niki casually was like, "Oh yeah, this guy that I was hiking the AT with," and she held up her hand, it's got this ring on there. That is now today my fiance. But, what is the tie-in that you have found to that monumentous experience of the AT and how that ties into your grief and doula work today and storytelling, of course, as well?
I think the AT was a pragmatic tie-in in the sense that if I didn't do that, I probably would still, I mean, there's a good chance I'd still be in Baltimore with that other guy. Or I don't know, it might not have been great because that was a pattern interrupt that I needed. Just having that humongous removal from work, from that person, from that routine, and to be upchucked into something totally different. I needed that to really shake things up and recalibrate my system and to realize there's more than what you're experiencing. It can be better. It can be different and you can make it different. You can make bold choices like going on the trail when you're scared to death. And you can do hard things like dumping this guy you've been clinging to for 5 years and move across the country and starting over with someone new. And so that kind of gave me the confidence, I think, as well to be like, you can, if you can do all those things, you can be a doula. Who says you can't? Imposter syndrome? So that helped with that. Again, just kind of getting away from that relationship and being with someone who does wholeheartedly support my decision and believes in me and doesn't think that this is a whack, fake, hippie thing, which are all things that my ex-partner would imply. And to have someone who really supports what I'm doing and my vision and my ambition, that does a hell of a lot, which I didn't quite expect. So just kind of having that environment change and having peace and stability puts me in the headspace to be able to do this vulnerable work. You're putting yourself out there and you're saying, hey, I can sit with you through these really heavy things. Throw them at me. I think it really helped kind of shake me up. I think it gave me the confidence to do hard things and to launch my practice and to start getting going and to make those connections with other doulas and to reach out and to start doing this grief work. And it also, I think, showed me, I've always been a writer, but I think this also showed me how important story is and just like our stories, because I've told the story of my hike so many times to myself, to others on podcasts, and I'm writing a book about it. I've learned so much from just talking about it and from reflecting on it and from writing it down in my trail journals and sharing it. And I'm not the only one who can benefit from that. So I was really thrilled to really hone in on that aspect of storytelling. And it made me more determined to bring that into my work moving forward as a doula. And
So
yeah,
cool.
I think it's just a good tie-in. It just really helped me change.
Yeah. So, I mean, what I take from that, among many things, is if you are feeling stuck, if someone listening is feeling stuck, that's some type of pattern disruption. You don't have to take 3 months off to hike the AT, but some type of pattern disruption, whether it be just taking a random Wednesday off work to go for a walk or do something different, go sit at a diner and journal, but just some type of pattern disruption. Although I will say that a pattern disruption that includes some type of friction I do think is helpful, right? Like I remember when I was really depressed in 2022 and I decided to do the Vipassana, which is the 10-day silent meditation retreat. That was a really important pattern disrupt for me. It was hard. It was out of the ordinary. I was away from my normal natural habitat. And that was a huge flip the switch in my depression. So if there's something that you can do when you're feeling stuck to just create a little bit of friction, a new experience to open your aperture to see life in a different way, I really think that it can be a game changer because a lot of times we feel like we're in a box. We're like, I've looked at every option and none of them seem good. But then when we get out of the box in some way and do something a little bit hard to increase our confidence and to look at things and we're like, oh, actually, I can do that. I'm not in the box that I thought
Mm.
that I was. And I'm grateful that you took the chance to do the AT. And I'm grateful that you continue to tell your story and that you help people through grief. And I really appreciate your honesty, just to close this thought, of you highlighting the idea a little bit ago when you were talking between the fact that death and grief work can be so illuminating, right? It highlights the impermanence of everything, the beauty of everything, like the just what a gift it is to be alive. It makes us hug our loved ones closer. But there is a spectrum of it, just like you said, when your fiance doesn't text you for a little while, you're not worried about cheating. You're like, he's dead, car blood on the road, like, so there is that spectrum, like, and because death is inherently can be scary. And so just knowing that it's this ongoing relationship and to work to stay in the light. I mean, I'm a hypochondriac as well. Every 6 weeks, I think I am dying from some new and exceedingly rare disease. So as much as I'm like, death is, the key to motivation and presence and all of that, death is also very final and is associated with loss and fear and the unknown. And so, but that we are able to manage that.
Yeah, and like being a doula doesn't, or even like you and I both being folks who are cozying up to the death positive movement. It's just a weird word, but like just because we are advocating like, wow, death and mortality contemplation really is that key to aliveness and that key to presence and gratitude, doesn't mean that it's still not fucking terrifying. Like, do I think about my parents' death and like cry? Yes, I do. Do I think about my partner's death and cry? Yes, I do. Do I think about my own death and cry? Yes, I do. It's like, ugh, and awful, but it is also that flip side of like that beautiful invitation. And it is an invitation to be more powerful because I think we're more powerful than we think we are, which is kind of touching on what you said before of like, we put ourselves in these boxes. And I've heard people and friends and myself say over and over again, like, oh, I don't have any other choices. This is it. Like, what a dumb thing to say. We are so much more powerful than we think. And I think when you think about the fact that we are impermanent creatures, we should take advantage of that fact. I think that opens a lot more doors. So yeah, amen to everything you said. Just had to riff on that.
Beautiful. Thank you. Well, as we close up today, first of all, thank you for all of your wisdom and your honesty and sharing your story. I would love to know and have you just riff more on what does aliveness mean to you today? When do you feel it? What does it feel like? And what is its function in your life?
Aliveness is when the littlest things can make you cry, like happy cry. I think, I don't know if it was your book, but I read it somewhere. It was something that I remember reading and being like, yes, this is it. Of like, oh, aliveness is when I have my fuzzy blanket on my feet and I can just sink into that feeling of like, this is so great to feel this. Or my morning coffee, which isn't here anymore, but like that first sip, like, wow, just experiencing that and actually sinking into it. And I've given this to my grief clients before as like an exercise of like, here's some homework, guys. You feel like you're disconnected, do this. And it's like, savor your coffee, make a ritual out of it, and tea or whatever your beverage is. Or walking outside and feeling the sun and just luxuriating in that warmth and being like, I'm fully present. My to-do list is there, but it's not all encompassing. Or it's just being able to like hold those two things in kind of a balance. Whereas before, again, this is me as a recovering, do everything disease person. Whereas before, all I could see was the to-do list. I wouldn't be able to feel the sun and I wouldn't be able to enjoy my coffee. I would just be like slugging it. So I think aliveness is being able to savor those little things, to be able to also go hike in the mountains that are right outside of my house and climb the summit and be like, wow, it's so pretty. It's beautiful. And I get to experience this with the person that I love and just see it and be here and just sink into that knowledge of impermanence and vastness and awe. And just thank you is a word that comes to mind a lot. I just see the word thank you scrolling across my eyes. Aliveness is all of those things. It's being able to to hold all those things in balance, to be able to move forward, but also sink into the present, which before I never could do. But I think I can now, or at least I'm better at it.
Thank you. I love your I have thank you ticking across my eyes. Yeah, that is. And don't live without being alive.
Yeah,
I think that's kind of what I'm getting from what you're saying, which is, we can live, but this idea of being alive, of actually feeling it, right? It is climbing a mountain, but it's also just the simplest act of feeling the treasures that we get because we're in this meat suit with a brain and a nervous system, and we can feel friction on our skin, and we've got taste buds and olfactory nerves and all of that, and just it's so delicious. We can miss it, can't we?
easily,
Very easy.
easily. Yeah. So it's a practice to come back to a lot. I
Present.
mean, at least for me, I just will sink back into the to-do list mode.
Every day, every
Mm,
day. I try not to let one day pass without feeling alive at least one moment. And
mm.
you've certainly made me feel alive today. Your story brought tears to my eyes on multiple occasions, especially going through the White Mountains, that beautiful experience, and your courage and trust that you've displayed as you wander through. What you said at the very beginning was that we don't need to have it all figured out in order to uplift and teach others. And that doesn't just go for someone who's in a profession like mine or yours. I think that goes for everybody, that we have no idea the ripple effect that we can have on one another by sharing our story vulnerably. And I know for myself, it's not undercutting that we have something valid to share and to teach. And you've certainly shared some wisdom today. So thank you so much, Niki.
Thanks, Kate. This was awesome.
Yes, well, may the people receive your message and beyond. I know you have a book that you're working on, and we will all follow you so that we can stay tuned for when that comes out. Where can we follow you? And if someone is interested in beginning some grief sessions with you, where can they go?
They can all check out my website. It's numbered-days.com. All of the information for booking and for sessions with me is there. I'm most active on Substack, which is my newsletter. And I write a lot about backpacking, all my misadventures out there, and also grief work and the insights I take from that. I've blended them. That would be Niki, Nikille.substack.com link, which I think also you'll throw there. It's numbereddays.doula.
Beautiful. Yes, go follow Niki and mix your adventure and your aliveness and your death awareness all in one.
Best way to do it.
Beautiful. Well, thank you. We'll be in touch, and it's a beautiful day to be alive.
Thanks so much, Kate.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Be Alive with Kate Manzer, and thank you for listening to any episode of Be Alive with Kate Manzer that you have ever listened to. It seriously means so much to me. You guys, we are coming up on 1 year of this show. What? Yes, and I am not going anywhere. In fact, I am doubling down. I have the most epic and beautiful, exciting season 2, year 2 planned for you. We are going to go even more deeply into the science, philosophy, psychology, and woo-woo of the wild and wonderful experience of being alive, as well as one of my personal favorites, as you know, mortality awareness, mystical experience, and beyond. It's going to be so, so good. Thanks for being here. Share this with a friend, subscribe, and let's let this little show shine its light wherever it's meant to, but with the help of your sharing. Thank you so much. All my love. Thanks for being alive with me today.